there would be a push to say that, crypto is the new kind of internet money, or it's the new kind of money. But I do think that the money that central banks issue remains relevant in the ecosystem. And I think that there are just additional use cases. The South African Reserve Bank has recently initiated is a payments ecosystem modernization project, which specifically looks at driving digital adoption of payment methods, and specifically the fast payment solution PayShap that we've launched, that was launched in South Africa, looking at innovative tools, including artificial intelligence, to enhance the cyber capability within the SARB, but also from a financial sector perspective in terms of what we are seeing within the financial sector.
Welcome to the latest edition of ITWeb TV. I am Admire Moyo. Today we are joined by Lyle Horsley, who is the head of Fintech at the South African Reserve Bank. Today we are going to be talking about the initiative called the G20 Techsprint Hackathon that the Reserve Bank will be hosting. We are also going to discuss about some of the major fintech trends that the South African Reserve Bank is witnessing, including emerging technologies such as cryptocurrency. Welcome to ITWeb TV, Lyle.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I understand the Reserve Bank is hosting this G20 Techsprint Hackathon. Can you share more details about this initiative, Lyle?
Thank you. So the G20 Techsprint officially launched on the 6th of May this year. It's part of our G20 presidency. And so the G20 Techsprints are competitions that you as a G20 presidency, you can decide whether you do them. And so the SARB, we've decided that we would look to initiate the Techsprint again this year. So this is the 6th edition of the G20 Techsprint. And it's really an opportunity to look for best-in-class technological solutions to solve for some of the problems that we've put forward. And we think that these problems are relevant not only to the SARB, but to the global policymakers and global central banking community as well. And so I think it's a fantastic opportunity to showcase what innovation is on the continent, what innovation is in South Africa, and I think most importantly, how we can think about technologies to help solve for a public good. And so we're really hoping that we can see those innovations come to the fore through the Techsprint.
Thanks, Lyle. Every time when people think of the Reserve Bank, they think of money being involved. So through this hackathon, what sort of money challenges are you looking to solve?
So we've put 3 problem statements on the table for innovators, developers, anyone that's up to the challenge. So the first problem statement calls for solutions to help solve digital identity and developing digital identity solutions. So we think that that's quite important, right? As finance becomes increasingly digitized, we need to think about a identity that's able to be used within a digital financial ecosystem. So how do we think about a secure, verifiable digital credential that people can use to identify themselves? The second problem statement speaks to data portability, and specifically to help SMMEs financing themselves. So how can we think about moving data across borders to enable SMEs to access new finance opportunities? And the third problem statement looks at addressing fraud and cyber risks in fast payment systems. So we know that in Africa, increasingly fast payment systems are being adopted, which enables money to move within seconds from one person to another person. And so our problem statement is asking, how can we mitigate fraud and cyber risks when we see increasing adoption of fast payment systems?
So do you have to be a geek for you to participate in this hackathon?
You just have to be creative, I think. And so there is prize money that's up for grabs. So per problem statement, the winner in each problem statement will get the $30,000 and the shortlisted proposals will get $5,000. So if you are an innovator, if you are creative, if you are a developer, and you are interested in solving problems to help regulators and policymakers shift the dial on some of these areas, then absolutely we want you to apply.
Awesome. So do you only need to be a South African citizen for you to be able to participate in this hackathon?
So this is a global competition. So I think the fact that it's being hosted under South Africa's G20 presidency, I think that will attract a lot of South African fintechs. We know that there's a dynamic fintech ecosystem in South Africa. So hoping that there are many South African fintechs that apply, hoping that there are many African fintechs that apply, but it's a global competition open to global innovators. And so, yeah, we're calling on solutions from all over the world.
Interesting. So when is the closing date for the applications? I understand you actually extended the deadline.
We did. We extended the closing date. So the closing date is now on the 4th of July. So it's in 2 weeks' time. And yes, I think that allows for additional opportunity to get those innovative solutions in. So hopefully the additional time allows for that.
So do you screen the applications?
So there will be a process. So once the proposals are all in, then there will be a shortlisting process. There will also be a screening process of the solutions that have come in. And then it will go through a shortlisting process, and those shortlisted proposals will then be announced to the public.
Is it?
Yeah.
So when are we expecting the winners to be announced?
So the award ceremony is scheduled for the 11th of November. And the shortlisted proposals will be evaluated by an independent panel of experts. So we're in the process of putting together that panel. So it's no SARB representatives will be part of that panel of judges. And so those judges will be able to evaluate the proposals. They'll be able to ask additional questions. And then on the 11th of November, we will then announce the winners at a ceremony that will be hosted by the SARB.
Or when the G20...
As the G20 comes to a close as well. So the G20 will conclude, I think, later in November, towards the 21st or roundabout there. So we are hoping to then finalize the Techsprint so that all of the South African G20 deliverables can then be closed off at the end of November.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks a lot, Lyle. I'm actually privileged that you are here today. We have just spoken about the Techsprint, but I'm sure, like as the head of Fintech at the South African Reserve Bank, there are a lot of trends that you are witnessing in as far as the evolution of the Fintech market is concerned in the South African market. What would you say are the biggest trends that you are noticing in South Africa's Fintech landscape?
So I think that South Africa does have a very dynamic, vibrant fintech ecosystem. And I think that one of the areas where we see a lot of innovation is in the payment space. So I think through some of the regulatory reforms that the SARB is also driving, we're going to continue to see this payments innovation playing out. And so we know that payments are often a gateway into other kinds of innovation. So typically it starts with how do you enable people to make payments quicker, more conveniently, cheaper, whether that's through something like a mobile wallet. And then it goes into other kinds of services, right? So lending or investment services. So we do see this extensive innovation that's continuing to play out in the payments space. We also see that there's growing adoption and use around crypto assets. So recently, crypto assets have become a regulated product in South Africa. And so we've seen that our conduct regulator has licensed around 240, I think, crypto firms. And so we see that there's growing use around crypto assets as well. I think that there are also innovative ways to think about lending and looking at alternative data to provide lending solutions, lending products. And so I think there's, a range of innovation that's playing out in the sector. Of course, AI as well is another one. We're seeing growing AI use and adoption, both in terms of bringing efficiencies to the operational architecture of firms, but also in terms of front-end applications that firms are deploying AI, whether that's through enhanced customer kind of servicing or these kinds of things. So I think AI is another thing that we are seeing increasingly being used within the financial sector.
Awesome. Great stuff. Since you mentioned cryptocurrency, Lyle, do you think eventually in future we'll get to a day where cryptocurrency will actually replace money?
So I think that I don't want to speak too much about whether they'll replace money. I think that what we are seeing is that there are growing use cases around crypto assets, whether that's for purposes of investments, whether that's for purposes of holding it as a store of value. And so I think the position that we've taken as the SARB is to bring crypto assets within the regulatory fold based on the risks that we see. And so I think that with crypto assets, there are various risks, right? And so the regulatory action that's been taken has been to address those risks, whether it's from an anti-money laundering perspective, whether it's from a enhanced consumer protection perspective, whether it's from a cross-border perspective. There have been all these regulatory interventions. And so I know that there would be a push to say that, crypto is the new kind of internet money or it's the new kind of money. But I do think that the money that central banks issue remains relevant in the ecosystem. And I think that there are just additional use cases around crypto assets. And what we are seeing now is that these things are coexisting. There's still the money that people use for payments that's issued by your central banks, but there are growing use cases around crypto assets as well.
Speaking of cryptocurrencies, I understand there's what is called central bank digital currencies. What is the Reserve Bank's position regarding central bank digital currencies?
So we've been exploring central bank digital currencies, and I think you can think of, again, different types of central bank digital currencies. The one where you think about it's digital rand that gets used for making payments between individuals or between small businesses. So that's more a retail use case. And then you can think about a form of central bank money that is similar to what exists today in sort of the settlement system, where it's used to settle obligations between financial institutions, and that's seen as the wholesale central bank digital currency. And so we've looked at both of those two things. We've looked at it through a retail feasibility study and through the Project Corker and Project Corker 2 that we've done, exploring the wholesale CBDC. And so I think from a retail perspective, our research is still ongoing, and we'll be in a position to articulate our views in the future around whether we see a role for a central bank digital currency to be used as a form of sort of everyday payments, if I can call that. But at this stage, no.
Interesting. So should we look forward to Project Coca 3, if I can put it that way?
So at this stage, there's no formal Project Corker 3. I think that coming out of Project Corker 2, there were many insights that we gained from that, and many areas of work where we've identified where we need to do some additional research and engagements with the industry to really think about those policy and regulatory implications of what potentially changes when you do introduce this new kind of technology, or what the technology enables. And so I think that's the work that we currently are focused on. And at this point, there's no formal Project Corker 3, but you never know.
You never know for sure. Thanks a lot, Lyle. Going back to fintech, I understand there are now lots of fintech players in South Africa. How easy is it, or how difficult is it to regulate the growing number of fintechs in the South African sector?
The challenge is the scale and pace at which things move currently. And so in some respects, regulation will almost always follow the innovation. And so based on what you are seeing, then you need to understand, what are the opportunities, what are the risks with that, and how do you then respond to those kinds of innovations. But I think that with South Africa, what we've done well is we've set up things that I think enable us, to allow us to get close to the fintech industry and to the innovations through things like a regulatory sandbox. So under our Intergovernmental Fintech Working Group, we have a regulatory sandbox where innovators can apply to come and deploy their solutions in a live environment where regulators are then able to set the parameters within which that kind of innovation can take place. And regulators can then see in practical ways what the implications are and hopefully make more informed policy and regulatory decisions from there. We have something like a regulatory guidance unit where fintechs can approach the regulators with questions around how their innovation fits within the regulatory framework. So we know that being in the financial sector is quite complicated. And so what we've tried to do is create an avenue that simplifies what the regulatory framework means and provides that informal guidance and steer to the market in terms of where the innovation fits in. So I think these are just small interventions that we've taken that to help guide this industry and the ecosystem so that it can develop in a responsible way. And also, I think, allows regulators to get closer to it, to see it, so that they are then able to understand it better and respond to it, I think, better as well.
Awesome. Actually, this week, Lyle, I was speaking to some cryptocurrency players, local cryptocurrency players, who were lamenting that cryptocurrencies neither been declared an onshore or offshore asset. And their main argument was, if crypto is to be declared like Bitcoin, if it's to be declared like an onshore current asset, it can actually help in boosting South African revenue by adding more to the national fiscus. What's your take on this aspect?
So this is the work that the SARB is currently working with the National Treasury on. So from our Financial Surveillance Department, there's work that they are doing to develop a framework for how you think about crypto assets from a cross-border perspective. Yeah. And it speaks to this question around whether you see crypto assets as being an asset that's onshore or whether you see it as an asset that's offshore and sort of, a cross-border transaction when you enter into a transaction with crypto assets. So that framework is still being developed. So I wouldn't want to preempt where that discussion is going and where the framework is going.
I'm lucky.
But I do think it's a very important question, right? And so I think that's why there's due consideration being given to it from our department in the SARB and from the National Treasury as well. And it does, of course, as you say, have implications for the South African Revenue Service in terms of the tax implications of that. And so I think there are consultations and engagements happening. And it should then be a position that gets communicated to the market.
Speaking of grey listing, Lyle, what is the Reserve Bank doing to make sure that we are not on that grey listing list?
So I just saw something last week or earlier this week around all the action steps that South Africa has taken, including the SARB, to address, the areas where we were found to be, where we needed to take some remedial action. And I think those have largely been addressed. I think the approach which has the principle that has shaped how we think about regulating fintech is really to look at what is the activity that the fintech is performing, right? So, and to then think about the frameworks that are already in existence and bringing those activities or those business models within those frameworks. So, if you think about a framework that wants to take deposits from the public and they want to do that in a very innovative digital way, it's still deposit taking, right? Whether you do it through a physical store or whether you do it through a virtual platform, it's still deposit taking. And so you will be treated as a bank or be expected to apply to be licensed as a bank. And the normal obligations would be placed on you around AML, KYC, reporting of suspicious transactions. And so similarly, whether you want to do something innovative in the payment space, whether you want to provide investment products to consumers, to the extent that those activities attract some kind of anti-money laundering or KYC obligation, they would still be placed on those fintech firms. And I think in that way, you mitigate this risk around potentially having firms operate outside of legal frameworks that speak to those FATF considerations.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lyle. We also have seen like the emergence of digital banks here in South Africa. One can think of the likes of Time Bank, Bank Zero, I think, as well as Discovery Bank. How have these emerging newcomers shaken up the South African banking market as we traditionally knew it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think those banks have done really well in the South African market. I think that they have brought a different customer experience. And I think overall, we often get asked this question around neobanks or digital banks. And, do we have a different do we have a different framework for banks, right? And so with a digital bank, as I mentioned, Discovery, Time, those banks are regulated in the same way as you would any other bank, right? So there's not a special dispensation that applies because of the underlying infrastructure or technology that you use. It's really about the activity that you are performing. So you are taking deposits from the public. That's the business of a bank, and you would still be expected to be regulated and supervised as that. And so I think that to have that kind of framework, I think, is quite flexible because it can then deal with different business models because it's agnostic as to the underlying technology that you're using. And so I think the framework is flexible enough that it has allowed for, a traditional bank that comes, with its multiple branches and that branch network, but then also to accommodate a bank that has no kind of branch network, which is a completely digital bank. And so I think what we are seeing as well is that there are growing partnerships between traditional banks and fintech firms. Because what fintech firms do really well is they provide that potentially a cheaper, quicker, more customized solution or product offering to a consumer. And so I think we've seen that if banks partner with these firms as well, it can potentially lead to a growing uptake of the banking product and bring a more innovative experience to the customer as well.
Great. Lyle, before this interview, we were talking about money. Like, if I suddenly have money, people are going to see that, there's something happening with this guy. I understand also if I suddenly get maybe 10 million rand into my account, the Reserve Bank is going to ask, like, where did this guy get this money? Something like that. How are you using emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence to monitor money movements or red flags, if I can put it that way?
So I think that, just to say, I don't sit in the supervisory teams, right? So I think we have, on the regulator side, whether it's our Prudential Authority, whether it's our Financial Surveillance Authority, that are supervisors of firms and that need to be looking out for sort of monitoring these suspicious transactions and so forth. But I think the point is that as financial services, in terms of the way they are offered, and as you see this growing impact of technology on financial services, the tools that supervisors use also need to evolve. And so whereas before, everything was paper-based, things now are becoming electronic, or they are increasingly digital. And so even in terms of the way that we supervise, there are tech solutions that enable supervisors to be more agile, to be able to be more proactive, to be able to monitor things in real time. And so I think those are all tools that are increasingly being explored or used by supervisors so that they can be more preemptive and less reactive to what's happening in the financial ecosystem. And I think AI will only sort of accelerate that, right? So that you are able to pick up patterns in large data sets and being able to proactively interrogate those data sets with your regulated financial institutions. So it's not just the financial sector that I think will become more digitally savvy, but also the regulators as well.
Thank you so much, Lyle. Moving on to the field of cybersecurity, we all know that one of the biggest motivations for cybercrime is actually financial. Just to check with you as the head of Fintech at the South African Reserve Bank, what are the trends that you are noticing in regards to cybersecurity? And if you can also maybe share with us some of the measures that you are putting in place to mitigate against some of these challenges related to cybercrime.
So cybersecurity sits with a different team in the SARB, right? So we have a dedicated cyber unit in the SARB. And I think that, again, there's looking at innovative tools, including artificial intelligence, to enhance the cyber capability within the SARB, but also from a financial sector perspective in terms of what we are seeing within the financial sector. And I think from our prudential regulator who supervises the banking sector, again, developing, I think, frameworks that are appropriate, but speaking to the evolving risk that they are seeing in the cyberspace, and placing those obligations on regulated financial institutions to have effective cyber mitigation measures in place, to report cyber incidents timeously. And so I think it's this dual approach of both as the central bank enhancing our own cyber capability, but also being responsive to what's happening in the industry and being able to develop appropriate frameworks to guide the industry in terms of the obligations that are being placed on them. And even from a payments perspective, there's been I think a directive that's been issued around the expectations on payment services providers from a cyber perspective as well.
Do you also monitor things like, mobile money? There's a growing usage of mobile money across South Africa.
So in South Africa at the moment, there's not a big mobile money. It's not as big as what we see in other African countries. I think what our payment system department is currently doing is to open up the payment system to bring more non-bank entities into the payment system. And I think through those kinds of regulatory policy interventions, we will then see more mobile money solutions that do come into South Africa. And also then that those will be monitored and regulated by the National Payment System Department. And so I think that is evolving, and that is the direction that we are going in.
Nice. And in your own opinion, Lyle, why do you think mobile money has not really taken off as it has done maybe like M-Pesa in Kenya? Why is South Africa different from other African countries in regards to the adoption of mobile money?
So I think it's partly because of our regulatory requirements and, what we've had in place in South Africa. And there's also, I think, card payments are more dominant in South Africa at the moment. And so I think if we do, amend some of the regulatory requirements, I think in response to that, you could have then different kind of products, solutions, market players coming into the market. And I think we'll have to see, what that means. But I think it's a big shift that we are making from a policy perspective. And so I think that's a policy direction that's already been in other jurisdictions. They haven't had the kind of regulatory environment that we've had. And so I think that's been a big factor in terms of why mobile money has been bigger in some African countries, but not as big in South Africa. And I think we'll have to see now where the market goes based on, the changes that are coming.
Okay, just to find out from you, Lyle, from what you are observing in the market as the head of Fintech at SARB, would you say cash is still king?
Is cash still king? I think when we look at the data, we see that a significant amount of payments are still being made in cash. And so I think what the South African Reserve Bank has recently initiated is a payments ecosystem modernization project, which specifically looks at driving digital adoption of payment methods, and specifically the fast payment solution PayShap that we've launched, that was launched in South Africa, and to look at how to make digital payments cheaper, faster, convenient, safe, and secure, so that you can have this alternative to cash. Because at the moment, I think cash is seen as it's cheap, it's fast, there's a low barrier to kind of using cash. And I think where we want to get to is to think about a digital alternative to that has all the benefits of cash, but still safe and secure for consumers as well. So I think we'll live in a world where hopefully you have cheap digital payment methods, while cash can still be used as well, if people want that.
Okay, now that you have mentioned PayShap, just to find out from you, how is PayShap actually disrupted, if I could put it that way, the South African payments market?
So I think the biggest disruption with PayShap is to have a payment instrument that allows money to move from point A to point B in under like 10 seconds, right? I think that wasn't there before. And so I think what the focus is on now is to grow the adoption and usage of PayShap. And like I said, I think with a digital payment instrument, people want something that is similar to cash. It moves quickly, it's cheap, it's quick, it's convenient. And I think that, those are the things we have to focus on to drive the adoption of PayShap. And I think there are things that are being planned through our payment modernization program to increase the use and adoption of PayShap.
Thanks, Lyle. I've also seen that there's been a growth of some payments channels or payment gateways. I can think of maybe also pitch payments, and a number of them. How are these actually, are they reshaping South Africa's payments landscape?
So I think those have all been innovative payment solutions that have come to the market, right? So today, if I want to make a payment online, there are different instruments or payment methods that I can use. And so I think that's, again, where fintechs bring that competition into the market. They help consumers with something that's quick, easy. And so that's why in the payment space, we've seen a lot of these innovations come to the market. And what we need to be thinking about is, that we don't create these walled garden solutions that only exist in one ecosystem. It's about how can you move across these different ecosystems as a consumer, so that, if I want to pay you, but you're not in my kind of network, it's still easy for me to move value to you as well.
So are these deemed like financial service providers, like a bank? Do they need like a license to operate?
So it depends on what activity they do. So if you're in payments, then you get regulated as either a third-party payment operator or a system operator. It depends on what you do. And if you are providing financial services, advice, intermediary services, then you get regulated as an FSP. Yeah. So it just looks at what is the activity that you are performing, and that then will inform, under which regulatory framework you sit, if there is a regulatory framework for you. Some activities, are completely new and there's no clear regulatory framework for them. And so regulators need to either adjust their rules for that kind of activity, or they need to develop a new framework for that kind of activity.
Last but not least, Lyle, thank you so much. Just in closing, what would you want to say to those individuals who would want to participate in the G20 Techsprint Hackathon?
To those that want to participate, I would really encourage people to apply. I think it's a unique opportunity to problem solve with policymakers. And so I think that for me is really a benefit, because it's problem solving for a public good. And I think we all want to contribute in some way, shape or form to solving the problems that we face. And this is one way to do that. So
you said how much is for grades? Before I also decide, start thinking of
thinking of putting your solution forward. Yeah. So for the per problem statement, the winner per problem statement gets $30,000, and the shortlisted firms get $5,000.
Thank you, Lyle, for coming to our studios.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you on this episode of ITWeb TV. We really appreciate your presence here. Thank you for watching this episode of ITWeb TV. We were speaking to Lyle Horsley, who is the head of Fintech at the South African Reserve Bank. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.